Oh, I only wish there was an established party that I could support without running for elections, because there is nothing worse than seeking people's votes. It's very, very boring. But there is no established party that we could support. Not on the left, not on the center, not on the right, of course. Look, allow me to say that this is a very special period in our history. Most of you are young. You had the bad luck of experiencing a 1929 moment in 2008. And just like in 1929, the Wall Street financial sector collapse caused or triggered a chain reaction that very soon afterwards fragmented the financial infrastructure of Europe, then moved into the economic sphere and caused a political crisis. The waves of austerity, the waves of deflation, surely but steadily generated political monsters, to put it bluntly. You're experiencing a postmodern 1930s. Any attempt to look at it as a Greek crisis, or a crisis of the Irish banks, of a crisis of the Italian state, a crisis of your pension funds and negative interest rates, is bound to confuse you, to stop you from understanding that here is a systemic European crisis, and all these are symptoms. The reason why you have negative interest rates doing harm to your pensions is the same as the reason for which we have very high levels of unemployment, youth unemployment in Greece, failing banks in Italy, and inability of our car industry, auto industry here in Bavaria, to produce the electric cars that are necessary. You know, we're falling behind. You're falling behind China. It's one crisis, if I'm right in this, and we have a systemic crisis. We need a systematic solution. None of the parties that you mentioned are interested in a transnational economic, political, and social agenda. So we thought, well, we need to start one. And if we need to start from scratch, we will do it. And that is why there is a Greek running in Germany. There is a German running in Greece. We have the same Green New Deal agenda being presented here in Munich, in Copenhagen, in Warsaw, in Sicily, in Oporto, in Spain, across Europe. We are too late, I think, in doing this. But better late than ever. Oh, it's worse than that. It's not even a question of enabling left politics. We need to re-enable politics. Because this is a great paradox we have in Europe. We have democracy in Bavaria, in Germany. We have democracy in Greece. We fought for it. I grew up in a fascist dictatorship. First time I came in Munich, I was 7 years of age, because my mother and father were running away from the Greek dictatorship. We ended up in Munich for a few months. So we have democracies in our nation states, in our regions, in our municipalities, and that is a fantastic thing, and we should preserve it like a very precious good that it is. But at the very same time, we have shifted all the important decisions to a democracy black hole in Brussels and Frankfurt. Frankfurt because of the European Central Bank. So all the decisions are being made, the important decisions. I mentioned Hollande. He wanted to increase the wealth tax, he wanted to change the fiscal pact and make it a growth and stability pact. You know why he stopped? I'll tell you why he stopped. I happen to know. When he was elected, he received a phone call from Frankfurt. No, actually, no, that's a mistake. From Paris, from the Banque de France, the Central Bank of France, the equivalent of your Bundesbank. And they said to him, Mr. President, congratulations. If you don't stop talking about the things you are talking about, the banks will cease functioning within a week. You must not rock the boat with Angela Merkel. You never heard of him again. He sunk without a trace. Now, when I was in the Eurogroup, right, Wolfgang Schäuble was very clear. First time he spoke in my presence, after I presented my proposals for what we should do with Greece's debt and program and all that, he said, spectacularly, and very honestly, and I appreciate that, democracy cannot be allowed to change economic policy. And then I said, well, let's not have elections then. If you're in debt, you shouldn't have it. So, look, we've created a monster. We've created a monetary union that has a central bank without a state behind it, because the European Central Bank doesn't have a corresponding state. Unlike in the United States, right? Or Germany, before the euro. You had the Treasury, the Ministry of Finance, and you had the Bundesbank. Correspondence. The ECB is a gigantic central bank, no state behind it. And you've got 19 states without a central bank. This is not a way to create a monetary union which is consistent with a political union. The fallacy in 1991-1992 of Helmut Kohl and François Mitterrand, they believed that you start with a monetary union and then you move towards a democratic political union. No. If you start with a monetary union, you make sure that there will not be a democratic political union. So, what do we do about this? This is okay, one thing is to lament the architecture, the way we created a problem. It's far more important to talk about solutions. DiEM25 and Democratia in Europa has a very clear strategy. It's a two-pronged strategy. We are moving along two paths that are parallel and one reinforces the other. The first one is economic, social, and environmental. We have three very clear policies of what can happen tomorrow morning using the existing institutions of the Eurozone as they are in order to fund the green transition works that we need to the tune of 500 billion euros every year without new taxes. That's very important. What to do about precariousness and poverty, how to tackle. We need at least 100 billion euros to spend every year across Europe in order to prevent poverty from destroying lives and empowering the fascists, to put it very bluntly. And thirdly, what to do about the banking system and public debt. So this is very tangible, very boring, very technical policies, but they are policies that are realistic, very, even conservative, I would say. But radical in the sense that they tackle the problem. That's one axis, one path. The second path, while Europe is stabilizing our political economy, our environment, the labor market, good quality jobs are being created in the labor market, while this is happening and people start seeing Europe again as a source of solutions, not just as a source of problems, we can start having the discussion amongst ourselves through citizens' assemblies at the municipal level, at the regional level, at the state level, at the European level, of what kind of democratic constitution we want to be living under in the next 10 years or so. So, tangible answers to what needs to be done tomorrow morning and a vision that we create together, not somebody comes up and tells us what it is, one that we create together through a constitutional assembly process of where we want to be in 10 years or 20 years. Well, all important democratic revolutions started with 2 or 3 people in a room deciding that they will not take it any longer. Yeah? when we started the Democracy in Europe movement in Berlin, at the Volksbühne Theater, another theater, because, you know, when the politicians turn parliaments into farce, we take theaters and convert them into parliaments. We had 100,000 members. Now, 100,000 members is a drop in the ocean, but, you know, drop by drop, we can create a river. We can create a torrent. And allow me to, I mean, you're a political scientist, you know this better than me, but for the purposes of this discussion, let me remind you, it won't sound good, I know, but it's important, that the fascists did not need to win government in France to make President Hollande introduce racist legislation in the National Assembly. The AfD did not have to win government in this country to shift the whole spectrum of politics in the direction of misanthropy. We are trying to do the same thing from the humanist, progressive side. We are not going to change Europe by being elected in the European Parliament for Christ's sakes. We are not. But we will table those proposals in the European Parliament. We will make the life of the Social Democrats, of the Greens, of the FDP, we'll make it very difficult, because we will say to them, why are you disagreeing with our proposal to utilize a common asset that we have, the European Investment Bank, in this way, so as to create good quality jobs and the technologies that we need for green transition? Tell us why. And if we start this process of infecting from within the institutions, but also within these theaters and the streets and the grassroots, there is no alternative. Now, if you ask me, well, is this going to work or not? I have no idea. Probably not. You know, probably this European Union will disintegrate. But we have a duty not to predict. We have a duty not to be in the business of prognosis, diagnosis. In science, it's your duty to predict. If you're a meteorologist, your duty is to predict the weather. And you are judged on the basis of the accuracy of your predictions. But when you are in politics, when you are in social work, when you are working with refugees, when you are working for the environment, you have a duty not to predict, but you have a duty to do that which is necessary. And if enough of us do that, then we will change the world. Well, I can't be something that is impossible. You cannot be a left-wing populist. If you're a populist, you are right-wing and misanthropic. If you are left and you try to be populist, you stop being left. Let's define our words, our terms, right? Because it depends on what you mean. Allow me to define populist myself, right? Populist has nothing to do with popular. It's got nothing to do with the people as such. A populist is a politician who exploits the discontent and the anger of people who have every reason to be angry, who have good reason to be angry. So a populist taps into this anger and uses it with false promises, looking at them and say, I'll make you proud again. They never promise concentration camps. They never promise war. They never promise bombs and machine guns. What they promise is to make you proud again, to make you feel that your country, your community is strong again, that you have dignity. That's what they offer you. And they harvest that anger. And then they take this power that they get from the anger of the people to impose authoritarianism upon the people and to sell them out, to work in the interests of the oligarchy. Look at Trump. This is precisely what Donald Trump has done in the United States. Donald Trump succeeded in becoming president because he turned against Wall Street. He turned against Hillary Clinton, who was so sympathetic and so close to Wall Street. And he said, I am going to drain the swamp, meaning Washington and New York, right? And he went to the Midwest and he talked to the dismissed, precarious, blue-collar workers, working class, proletarian workers, in places where the establishment had abandoned them. And said, I will make you proud again. I will build a wall. I will stop the American corporations from taking money out of the country or jobs out of the country. And he promised them all that. He beat up their anger, joined it together with racism, and created a power base for himself. First thing he did was to take 3 people from Goldman Sachs and appoint them in his cabinet. Right? Exactly the same way, you will allow me to say this, that the National Socialists in this country, who were attacking the bankers, the rich, and the capitalism, you know? I mean, some of the most powerful criticisms of German capitalism came from people like Goebbels in the 1920s, right? And what do? Firstly, they get funded by Krupp, by the banks, by the oligarchy, and the first thing they do is they empower the oligarchy once they gain power. So, the last thing we Democrats must do is stop criticizing the establishment and the oligarchy, which is creating the discontent amongst the people that then the populists, who are always right-wing, exploit in order to gain power against liberalism, against the traditions of democracy, to introduce authoritarian rules supposedly in favor of the people, and then turn it against the people. So that can never be left-wing. What does it mean to say you're a left-wing populist? Well, allow me to criticize Podemos. They are not right-wing. They're good people. They're my friends. But why are we not running with Podemos in Spain? Because they don't believe in having a very definite, tangible, realistic, pan-European program for change. We try to have this with them, but they have a policy of not having a policy. In that sense, they are trying to please everyone by not saying anything specific. But that's not populist. That's simply inefficient politics, and this is why they are now declining. We would not have created the Democracy in Europe movement if we do not base it on the hope of democratizing the European Union. So allow me to be a bit positive now. You know, because I don't do optimism. Optimism I don't like. I think optimism is for fools. You have to be a fool to be optimistic. But I put a lot of emphasis on hope. Optimism is a third-rate variety of hope. Yeah. Hope we must have. I mean, what is the point of living if we don't have hope? I mean, we'll all die, we know that. That's no reason not to wake up in the morning enthusiastically and with hope. So we do that. So I don't need to be optimistic to do that. Yeah? So allow me, this was a personal note. But look, the hopeful message I have for you is this. The fact that the European Union is a democracy-free zone, a bit like the moon with oxygen, doesn't mean that we shouldn't democratize it, or that we can't democratize it. Our states were not democratic, were created as the political wing of ruthless despots. That's what the state was. It was an instrument by which the rulers kept the people down. It was the opposite of democracy. Even the Magna Carta that the British love to posit as you know, the beginning of Western democracy, which it is in a way. What was the Magna Carta? It was a contract between the king and the barons, so the barons would be allowed to keep their slaves and their capacity to exploit them. That's what it was. And to keep their own wealth, it was a contract between the barons and the king and royalty. So, we have created democracy out of that kind of political instrument called the state. We can do the same thing in Brussels. But we're not going to do it through tiny little whimsical reforms of a system which was set up to cancel out democracy. Because even, if I were to send you, or if the German people were to send you to the Council of Europe, to the European Union Council, you have a mandate. But so does the French president. So does the Portuguese prime minister and so on. So they all have mandates. So they cancel each other out. There is no mandate. And you know what happens? Merkel leaves European Union Council meeting, and she comes back to the Bundestag and says, it is the best I could achieve. And the French President Macron goes to France and says the same thing. So nobody owns the decision. Nobody's answerable to anyone, because everybody says, it's not what I wanted it to be. And no one can fire them as a group, as an instrument. So this is where Claudia and I agree entirely. We need to move towards a federal Europe, where we can elect our federal government. I demand the right to vote for a German in the same way that the German should be able to vote for an Italian, like an Arizonan votes for a president that comes from Minnesota. Yeah? But to move to that stage, we need first to stabilize our political economy, and at the same time to start the process of writing together our constitution. Because what binds together a democracy, what creates a demos, is not so much the common language. You can hear that my German is zero, non-existent. It is common political activity and the collective authoring, writing of our rule book, our constitution. This is a huge discussion, but allow me to be brief so that Claudia can answer. Firstly, by doing what we're doing today. Here you have a Greek running and seeking your votes. We have a German in Greece seeking Greek votes. And we have a transnational movement. So that's a European demos in the making. It's not another Europe is possible, another Europe is here. Point number one. Point number two, you said, there is the German point of view and the Greek point of view. No, there isn't. Any sentence beginning with the Germans think this is wrong. Because you disagree amongst yourselves. Any sentence with the Greeks believe that is completely wrong. There is more commonality between the average Greek and the average German than there is between the Greeks or between the Germans. How about by telling stories, true stories? Will you allow me to tell a story? Which I think explains the Euro crisis in a way that brings all of us together. It was 2011, in the midst of the worst part of the Greek drama, not Greek crisis. We Greeks have lots of words like that. Tragedy, drama, catastrophe, crisis.
Deswegen sind Sie kein Optimist.
I talk about the European crisis and the Greek drama. Yeah? So it was 2011, and I was flying via Munich to New York on Lufthansa, I remember. And I was going to a conference, doesn't matter what. And I was sitting next to a guy. You know, when you are on the same plane for 8-9 hours with someone, after a while you start talking because it's so boring. And, okay, so he told me his story. He was in his 60s, German, used to work for one of your failed banks, Commerzbank, I believe. Yeah? And he had just retired. And he told me a story which initially didn't make sense. I said, well, so why did you retire? He said, because he was a relatively young man. He said, because I nearly got sick after the euro was created. I thought, why? Why did the euro make you sick? He said, listen, before the euro, I lived a heavenly life. I used to fly to Athens, to Madrid, to Rome, to Dublin. And I would see bankers there, I would see industrialists, I would see ministers, and all of them wanted my money, the German bank's money. And they would take me to the opera, they would take me to nice restaurants, they will try to convince me that they will be good debtors, and that they will be reliable, and I would go back to Frankfurt with dossiers full of business plans, and I would study them at my own leisure and decide who gets what and whom I am prepared to lend money to. It was great. And then the euro came. And from the moment the euro came, my life became hell. I said, why? He said, because headquarters in Frankfurt gave us quotas. We had to lend every week so many billions. And if we did not lend so many billions every week, our job was unsafe. So suddenly, I would have to go to Athens, to Dublin, to Rome, to Madrid, right? And I would have to bribe them to take money from me. Bribe them to take money from me. And they would be playing hard to get, because they were other German bankers and French bankers doing the same thing. And that was, I was feeling that I was giving money to people that I could see were corrupt, that we wouldn't get our money back, and headquarters was pressurizing me to give it away. Now, the question is why? Why did this happen? So you need to explain this to the people in this country. When you create a common currency, and you merge the Deutschmark with the Italian lira or the Greek drachma. What happens is this. If you have an economy like Germany's, which has a lot more capital than an economy like Greece, there is always going to be a trade surplus coming from Germany to Greece. More Volkswagens will be sold to Greece than Greek cars will be sold to Germany. There are no Greek cars. Okay? So, when there is an exchange rate that is flexible, okay, what happens is the Greek drachma keeps going down and stabilizes the trade volumes. But if you have the same currency, that is no longer possible. So, for every Volkswagen or BMW that goes to Greece or to Ireland, an amount of money comes from Greece to Commerzbank in Frankfurt. That creates a big lake of money. Big lake of money. Why big lake of money? Because the Germans don't have the same need to borrow as the deficit countries do. So this big lake of money is a nightmare for the bankers, because there is nothing worse for a banker than money that they are not lending. Idle money is terrible. Huh? So they make this guy go and say, Germany did not have the demand for those funds. You didn't have the demand for those funds. Volkswagen did not have the demand for those funds. So they take this money, they give it to France, whatever his name is, they say, go to Greece, go to Spain and so on, and give it away. And you know what the Greeks had that was fantastic from the Commerzbank point of view? Low levels of private debt. The Greeks own their homes. They're not very good homes, but you know, they own them. Yeah? Suddenly, and they don't have any debts. Or they didn't have any debts back then, in 2000. So they are a banker's dream. People with the Deutschmark, the euro, same thing, same currency, who have no debt and own their homes. Fantastic. Dump all of it to them. So they then buy Volkswagens and BMWs. House prices start going up. People in Greece, in the periphery, start feeling richer. They get from their banks, the Greek banks, money that the Greek banks have borrowed from Commerzbank and Deutsche Bank and so on, to get credit cards. We used to have credit cards arrive in our post in Greece before 2008 that we had not applied for. No, seriously. I was tearing them up and burning them and putting them in the bin. But some poorer people say, well, you know, I will buy something for my son, for my daughter. So, okay. Now, this is what happens when you have imbalances in an economy like Europe. Because, you know, Germany has an 8.5% trade surplus. Now, somebody has to have a deficit for this. And the tragedy for Germany is that to maintain this surplus, you need to keep lending your savings to foreigners. You have to. Because for everything you sell to the foreigners, you get money. And that has to be recycled. You have to give it back to the foreigners to keep buying your stuff if you're going to have a trade surplus. So, trade deficits are terrible, but trade surpluses are terrible as well. And the reason why you have wage stagnation in this country, or had mini jobs, hard sphere reforms and so on, was to keep this imbalance going. So, to cut a very long story short, recycling is essential. But this kind of recycling through the banks only strengthens the oligarchy in Greece and the oligarchy here. And when their bubbles burst, you have to pay for it, and the Greek people have to pay for it. And then they turn you against the Greeks and the Greeks against you. When it is an alliance of oligarchs from here and from there that are effectively functioning in a way which is detrimental to the majority of the Germans and to the majority of the Greeks. This is what we need to tell the people who are lured by the AfD. It's not the Germans versus the Greeks. It's the oligarchy across Europe against the majority across Europe. Before I speak to the Green New Deal, which I really want to, one point about how do we get ourselves heard by those that must listen to us. Well, firstly, this is not a contest between different political parties. The worst enemy at the moment is not so much supporters of the AfD, of other parties that are not in agreement with us. They are not the enemy. The enemy is apathy. It's people who have switched off politics, who are sick and tired of the political process, who don't give a damn about any political party, who are not going to go to vote, who simply stay at home and privatize their fears and lick their wounds. This is our main target. And we will get to them if we have tangible answers. If we can say things to them that are not, oh, we want another Europe, we want fairness. They say, yeah, go away, just go away. I'll die if I hear you speak another word. Yeah? So you need to answer specific questions. So, what is it that people are worried about? They are worried about, in this country, allow me to say, to the extent that I know anything, firstly, they are worried that their children have worse prospects than they had. The quality of jobs is coming down, security is coming down, precariousness is going up, especially for their children. That's number one. Connected to this is their pensions. Especially the Swabian housewife that was putting money away in the kitty, according to Angela Merkel. I believe Angela Merkel. Whatever she says, I agree with. Okay? So, and she sees that negative rates, interest rates, are eating this away. And they all blame the European Central Bank and therefore the European Union. Okay? And the third thing they worry about, a lot of them, increasing numbers, is the environment. Is the fact that Earth will no longer be able to sustain life as we know it for very long if we continue. So these are the three things. Now we need to answer those concerns directly, without ideological poetry or philosophizing. Very direct things. Okay? So the first thing we have to tell them about their pension funds is why do we have negative interest rates? Because we have about 3 trillion euros in the banking system of Europe doing nothing, except pushing up house prices, increasing inequality, making sure that their kids will not get a home. They are being used by corporations to buy back their own shares, pushing up share prices, and therefore the salaries of the managers of Volkswagen and Siemens and Krupp and all that, creating more inequality. And they're not investing. And while they're not investing in good quality jobs, so their kids will have to drive taxis under Uber rules. Okay, so if you speak to them about that like that, okay, say to them, all right, let's say we elect the AfD and we break up Europe or the Eurozone and we go back to the nation. So what's going to happen? Well, let's say we have a button, we press it now, and the EU goes. What will happen is the Deutschmark will come back. And it won't be just Germany. You will share the same currency with Austria, with Holland, with Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and the Baltics. Because they are fused into the German industrial machine. Yeah? That part of northeastern Europe is going to have a currency, call it Deutschmark, call it whatever you want, that will go through the roof. By going through the roof, the precariously employed mini-job people are going to become unemployed. So how is this going to help your children? I would say to the AfD person. What we need to do is we need to take this money, which is there in the banking system of Europe, and invest in jobs for your kids and for the environment. And say, yeah, but how is this going to happen? And here is the answer. And now I'm coming to answer the question. But I think it's important not to stick to the technicalities, to blend it into a narrative that a taxi driver who votes for the AfD can understand and follow. So we say this, okay. There's no way, I mean, it would be good if we could tax the rich a lot more than we are taxing them, and we will try to do it. But if we wait until we tax the rich and Google, it will be 10 years, the planet will be dead, we'll be dead, the kids will have no jobs, and so on. So taxation is important, but it's not the solution now. We are proposing that the European Investment Bank, which belongs to all Europeans, should issue 500 billion worth of bonds every year for 5 years. That's 2.5 trillion. Yeah? That's most of the excess liquidity of 3 trillion, which is in the banking system. The rich who have the money in the banking system will love to buy those bonds. Why? Because they are really scared now. They have nothing to buy, nothing safe. Okay, it's bad to be poor, but it's also not very good to be extra rich. If I were to give you €1 billion now, what would you do with it? Put it in Deutsche Bank. It's bankrupt. Don't do it. It's a mistake. Give it to the Spaniards, to the Greeks? No. Unsafe. Send it to America, to Donald Trump. So there are no bonds to buy because Mr. Scholz is not issuing any because he's running a surplus. So there are no new bonds being... so you don't know what to do with it. So, but if the EIB were to issue those bonds, especially if the ECB, the European Central Bank, were to make an announcement that it will step into the market and buy them if their price starts coming down, the rich will flock to purchase them. That way, Europe can have a war chest of 500 billion every year to spend, to invest in the green technologies that we need to create the green energy union, to disentangle ourselves from Gazprom and Vladimir Putin, to stop burning lignite in this country, which is a scandal. In 2019, burning lignite, the dirtiest fuel in the history of the industrial society. Yeah? Build trains that we don't have, electrify all cars, not leave it to the Chinese and then accuse the Chinese of being ahead of us. Yeah? Not very clever thing to do, right? So, and notice two things that this proposal entails. First, it is radical, but it's very conservative at the same time, because we're not proposing something that it is not within the rules of the European Union. Not €1 of new taxes. The European Investment Bank has been doing this, has been issuing bonds for 30 years. And the European Central Bank has been purchasing those bonds since the 1st of March 2015. So we're not proposing something completely out of the blue, or the red, or the green. We are proposing something that is already happening to be scaled up magnificently. Like when you go to war, you use your industry and you scale it up in order to meet the national emergency. We have this tool, scale it up, create what we call a green transitions a green works transition agency within the European Union to recycle this 500 billion to give it to the private sector, most of it. To build the new technologies and the solar panels and the battery stacks that we need in order to store energy during the night or during windless days. That way we create good quality jobs and we tackle the environment, catastrophe or emergency very quickly and in a way that every boat is going to be lifted by this incoming tide. So we need a combination of understanding their worries and coming up with answers that they can say, yeah, that's not a bad idea. If you can get somebody that would have voted for the AfD to say, that's not stupid, that's the beginning. It's a fantastic question. I don't know what the answer is. But what I do know is that as a Democrat, I don't want to see the European Parliament being the one that decides that the rights are democratic constitution. Let me remind you, or tell you if you didn't know, that when democracy was first invented, however flawed it was in ancient Athens, the big clash between the aristocrats who hated democracy and the Democrats was focused on the fact that the Democrats were against elections and the aristocrats were in favor of elections. And the reason was that the Democrats believed that the aristocracy can always manipulate elections. And they were the ones that actually spoke better because they had better teachers, they were richer, so they could afford the good teachers for their kids. So they believed in lotteries, in selecting officials by lot, randomly. So what we are proposing as DiEM25 is this. I don't know whether this answers your question, but it's moving in that direction. We are proposing that we kickstart the process, the Constitutional Assembly process, with schools, where you ask children to imagine a 15-page document that describes the rules, the constitution of a Europe in which they want to grow up, in which they want to live, as a way of infecting society from the schools upwards with this dialogue, with this problematic. No? And the same thing to have municipal discussions, regional discussions, of what kind of democratic government? Do we want a federation? Do we want a federal government? Do you want a federal parliament? What would it be like? But in the end, who actually writes the document? We believe that we should have an assembly that is selected across Europe proportionately in a way that takes into consideration the diversity of Europe, of something like 3,000 people from Europe, selected by lot, by biased lot, to ensure that 50% are men and 50% are women, that all the regions are represented. And then, different political parties, the Commission, whoever, can present ideas. They can bring on experts, legal experts, political activists, and so on. And through a process where there is a deliberation amongst those who are selected by lot, by lottery, that the rest of us Europeans are tuned into. We have live streaming, so we participate in these debates. They, in the end, in a period of 2 or 3 years, formulate the key passages of the Constitution, including differences of opinion between them, which can then be put to a pan-European series of referenda. all the investments that you mentioned are green, right? So all the artificial intelligence, we need artificial intelligence in order to power the green transition. So it's not either or. That's the easy part. The second question was the easy one. The first one on Italy. Look, Italy was always going to be the battleground for the euro. Why? 2.7 trillion public debt. Italy comes out, there is no euro. I can tell you that, in my estimation, if there is any movement towards a parallel currency in Italy, it's not a question of whether Italy will leave the euro. Germany will leave the euro before Italy does. There's no doubt about that. Berlin and Frankfurt are not going to wait around to see what happens to Italy if it gets out, before they get out, before you get out. I hope it doesn't happen, because it will be highly costly to a majority of people in every country. But it could happen. Now, the politics is completely hostage to the economics. Because think about this. Italy is not Greece. Italy has a trade surplus of 3% of total income. That's a lot. Not as big as Germany's, but it is a lot. So Italy sells a lot more to the world than it consumes from the world. And the government has a primary surplus, has had one since 2010, 2011. So it's a government that lives within its means, even if it's inefficient, corrupt, it doesn't matter. Right? But it lives within its means. It's not borrowing money in order to pay pensions, whatever. And a country that is living within its means. And yet, the median Italian has seen his or her living standards, income, fall every year for the last 18 years. Then they wonder in Brussels, why is Salvini a strongman in Italy? That's why. Because Italians are migrating from Italy. Yeah, young men and women are leaving Italy like like the Greeks are leaving Greece, in a country that should be successful. And it's not successful because it is part of a Eurozone architecture that does not allow the Italian economy to breathe. So either we're going to reform the Eurozone through policies like the ones that we are advocating, because you see, this Green New Deal would change all that. Because this would be a sensible, productive, efficient, ecological recycling, not the recycling that we have now through Deutsche Bank and UniCredit and so on. If we don't make any difference, we will continue to see the rise of Matteo Salvini. In the European Parliament elections, he's going to do tremendously well. Remember, this government is a coalition government between the Cinque Stelle and Lega. Lega is the junior partner. They have 17% of the vote, something like that. 18 had, and Cinque Stelle had 30. Now this will be reversed. It will be Salvini that is on top, on the basis of his xenophobia, his racism, his abrasiveness, his anti-Europeanism. Immediately after that, in September, he's going to have a clash with the establishment in Brussels regarding the budget. It's up to him to decide whether he's going to wind this clash down, do a Tsipras, that is effectively continue business as usual in the way that Tsipras did in Greece, or escalate it by creating a common, a second currency. I fear that he's going to do I fear both, because neither of these are good developments for Europe or for Italy. But if he creates a second currency, then clearly the Italian debt will be redenominated mostly in that second currency. In other words, in euro terms, it's going to go down. A lot of German institutions are going to feel the pinch. We are going to be in the clasps of a new political, financial, and economic crisis. So, the Green New Deal is the only solution. There you are. If you take the Green parties, the European Greens program and our program, they're very, very close. I was debating yesterday in Hamburg with Sven Giegold. We're friends, we agree on almost everything. So I'm quite happy for you to vote for the Greens. Yeah? But I think that you should vote for us for the following reason. Everything the European Greens are proposing, we endorse. Everything. My criticism is that they are not ambitious enough. They talk about funding the Green New Deal from taxation. We need to fund it from taxation. We need to make the Googles of the world, the Facebooks, the Volkswagens, we need to make them pay. We need to increase corporate tax and have a homogeneous, exactly as the Greens say. We propose the same. But believe you me, the Fridays for Future people, when they do this to us, especially older people like me, and they accuse us of not having done enough, they're right. And they want action now. They don't want action in 2035. By 2020, 21, 22, we must make a difference. Now, with the Greens program, it won't happen. Because, believe me, I was a finance minister. Even if you push through Parliament these tax bills, the mechanism of hitting tax havens. Luxembourg is the largest tax haven in the world, and it's in the middle of Europe. Now, you need to... I don't have an army to go into Luxembourg and take over. I wish I did. Because Luxembourg is a genuine tax haven in the middle of Europe. So is Holland. Right? So, but the proposal that we're coming to you with, of energizing the European Investment Bank in a way that it is completely legal, taking the money that is already slushing around in the financial sector through bonds issues, can fund it tomorrow morning. The Greens are not going for it, and I will tell you why they're not going for it. Because they're too scared that in the regional parliaments here, that they have alliances with the CDU and so on, they will be accused of being too radical. That is why. They have been around for too long. Have you noticed the 25 next to DM? It's our expiry date. No movement should last more than 10 years, because it becomes part of the establishment, like the Greens have. We will work with them. I'm glad if you vote for them, because we need them to be strong. But we are urging you to vote for it because their agenda is our agenda, but we are not scared to come up with radical, but at the same time moderate and legal solutions to answering the Fridays of the future people, for the future people, and telling them what we could do tomorrow morning. Let me give you another example, where I have a clash with the Greens, and I hope you will be with me on this, and not with the Greens. Poverty. We estimate we need to spend at least 100 billion on poverty. You know, in the United States, when I used to live there, I was very impressed by the food stamp program. You know, poor families in America receive a check every week signed by the Federal Reserve, the equivalent of the European Central Bank. And that allows them to put food on the table. This check that arrives every week reduced poverty in the United States from 24% to 13%. Very simple, a very cheap way of doing it. Now imagine if we would be more advanced than the Americans, we would distribute to poor families in East Germany, in Sicily, in West France, debit cards issued by the ECB. And debit cards that could be used to buy food, pay for rent, electricity bills, basic transport. That would cost 100 billion. Where should the money come from? If we expect governments to agree to contribute it to a common fund, it will take 30 years before it happens. But let me tell you this. Last year, the European Central Bank had profits of 91 billion. Take it. Central banks shouldn't have profits. They're not private banks. Central banks should simply meet their costs. And you know what happened to that 91 billion? It went to the ministries of finance around Europe in proportion to the size of their economy. So the German one got the most. In return for what? Why should the German government get this money? It's not a return to anything, to effort, to investment, to taxation, nothing. This is money that the euro system is breeding on its own. So take this and create this unifying fund. So we are proposing this. The Greens said, oh, we can't say that because what will the CDU say? They will not like it because, you know, Scholz is receiving this money now and he can use it. Yeah? Not ambitious enough.